Hello and welcome to another part. This part is going to be about using the points and making like some text geometry for each point or for specific points. To make things a bit more simple, we're going to focus on one point. So we would just place a blast node, and with the blast we can blast point 0, so 0, and then we're going to say points to make sure it's points and revert this. So now we have one single point. What I will often also do is doing a sort node, so we can randomly select the points. So here, if I change this to a random order, we basically now will select, if we would focus on this one here, we will now have different store names if I randomly select this. So now we have a random selector. Then from this, I'm going to do some calculations about how the font should look like and so on. Now let's start simple by using the font node. And here we want to then use the store name, for example. So how do I get this attribute from the point into this other node? And usually I like to use spare inputs. So I'm going to say here, add spare inputs, and all the way at the bottom, you have a new input, spare input, where we can link nodes together. So this is an easy way to link or reference nodes together. So we can sort of like share the data from the input. Now in the text itself, we want to, of course, get rid of it. So here you can see we have the store name. So we want to remove this. We're going to use here this key, and we're going to say look for point attributes. We're going to have to say points to use the string part. We're going to use -1 because -1 will target the spare input, which will be this blast node. So we will basically say like look at the spare input. From the spare input, look at point number 1 or point number 0 basically. And we want to get the store name. So in my case, I called it store. So we want to look for store. I'm going to close it back off here like so. And as you can see, it should work like this. So it should work like that. So we have now this store name. So if I would now again use my random seed generator, we have now different names here. So this is one part of doing it. So in theory, you could also try to ask it for a font, but you have to be careful that you support the font that ChatGPT generated. So you can ask ChatGPT like generate a font for each store, but if the font is not installed, then of course you might come across issues. So here we can do something like this, so it looks a bit nicer. And with this font, I also would like to have the option to maybe do some deformations. So I'm going to use a spline, and I'm going to do a path deformation along the spline. So let's take a line, for example. And in this line, we can make the length the highest possible and also the points the highest possible. I'm going to set the direction here to 1 in the X and 0 the other ones. And I'm going to sort of like deform my text along the line. A basic way on doing this is using the path deformer node, so path deform. And we have our geometry to deform, and we have the spline for that. So you can see it's not really working. My line is in this way. So probably an easy way to fix this is by rotating our font. So transform. And here we're going to rotate our transform 90 degrees. So now you can see it's like aligning with that path. As you can see, it's now way better. So you can play around with some of these parameters here. By default, it should be fine. You can also like play around with different like scaling if you want to like scale it down at some point. Like you can scale it by the ramp here. So you can make something like this. I'm gonna just turn it off. So this could be like a parameter in your tool if you want to make it a bit more fancy with more parameters and things to play around with. So you can do like scaling options. One thing that I like to do here is adding a switch node for different options of a line. So our line is pretty, I would say, a bit boring. It's just a straight line, but we can also do like a noising or the mountain node basically. So here we have the mountain node, and I recommend here to disable long vector, so it will get super noisy. And we also want it to only be in the y-axis, which is up axis in Houdini, so it will only deform like so. Now, if we would plug this into the switch and we said, for example, hey, I would like to have a bit more noise, we have now something like this. So this is, of course, way too heavy. You can also try to enable like the rigid. So we'll try to keep the shapes better. But of course, it's like maybe a bit broken too much. So I like to usually go here and disable, first of all, the fractal, so it's a bit more smoother. And I'm going to play around with the scaling size. So here, as you can see, we can get some nice funny wavy curves in our text. So something like this, for example. And this is just to make, again, a bit more interesting variation instead of having it like in a full line. We can also draw a line. You can use the draw curve tool here. So draw curve. And we can make like a basic arch, something like so. And we can, for example, do smoothing, or we can do smoothing on the noise as well. So if we do smoothing pass, for example, let's make it a bit heavier. Maybe the filter is a bit less. Like so, you can also do smoothing on that other one as well. You can play around with how much it should be smoothed out, because you don't want to deform the font too much. So here we have like a different option. Like this will always be like into like an arch shape style. So that's roughly how we can add some interesting variations to the text. So this sort of like could be called done. So I have a tool that will then be able to switch between different types of sort of like paths deformations. Now this is of course our slogan part, so we can or the main text, the store text, and then we can also make another one which is then for the slogan. Now, for the slogan, it's going to be a bit more tricky in the sense that the slogan is usually pretty long in text. I don't know if I maybe can find a one that's a bit longer. Maybe we can look for something like this. So if you're going to make like this board with the text on it, we want to maybe cut the sentence, the slogan sentence, into, for example, 2 or 3 pieces. So we can divide the text a bit better on that space. Now I'm going to solve this with actual wrangle, so some vex. So let's place a wrangle node. Let's do it like this. Of course, there are many other ways, but I just decided to just do a simple thing where you just measure, or split the sentence into each part for each word and then divide the sentence a bit better. So we're going to make this new string, and this is going to be an array. So these will be the different parts or the different words. Maybe I should call it words. These are all the words in the sentence. So here, and this will basically be like split or attributes called as slogans. So slogan, and this will then again will just extract the words by themselves. Then we're going to make a new array. So, and this will be a one. This will be a one that we will export to as attributes. So this will be like the new text parts. And then we're going to do a loop. So for each time we find a certain amount of words next to each other, we make it into one part. So I'm going to like try to group the pieces by 3. So here in this case, we should have a part that's called great quality at, and then the next part or next start of the sentence would be affordable prices, just so we can match the size a bit better or make the board a bit more clear to read. I'm going to just hard code a loop by a certain amount. So let's say amount equals to 10, and then we're going to do for loop. So for integer x equals 0, then if 0 amount, and we're going to, and x will be increased every loop. So we're going to now make a string called, for example, s, so new string, and we're going to get the or words, so we're going to get the words, and for each loop I'm going to make x multiplied by 3. So the first loop, it will be the first word, so it will be looping by 0, multiplying by 0. So I'm going to then add back the space in, like so. Then I'm going to maybe just copy paste words again. So I will just do this 3 times. So we will have the first 3 words here, but I just want to do a +1 here at the end. And then again, adding some spacing and doing then +2 here at the end, so +2. Like so, and then at the end, what we want to do, we want to append the new data to our existing array or new array. And then we're going to say add the s string that we made. Oh, and I forgot to also add this over here. Oh, and of course I forgot, I made a big mistake by putting 0 here. It should of course be x. So now there should be an attribute called the text parts. And as you can see, we basically now divided this into 3 parts. So of course I forced it to like loop 10 times, which is not necessarily needed, but this is just to show you how it can do it. Like I said, there are like other ways on doing this. You can find way better options. This is like roughly a quick way by just getting the 3 words roughly and putting them into a new string. So this is also a good way of doing this. You can also just keep it to 10 parts, which I will actually sort of use in the loop. So let's make a loop now. So for each number, we want to then fetch the input data here. So this top node is set to just get input. And then here we have a loop that also goes 10 times. That's why the 10 is sort of like quite consistent here in this case. So we want to loop over this array that we have, and we want to then extract each part based on the loop. And we will do that with a wrangle as well. So here, fill in a wrangle, and we're also going to use the metadata, which is holding the iteration number. And we can just do it like so. So we're going to call this like get current part, for example. And we're going to only use 1 line of code, which is add, for example, current part equals to that slogan attribute. I'm just going to copy paste this over here. So equals to that. And of course, we want to get that value. So we're going to set a certain number in here. So it's going to be either from 0 to 9. So we're going to have 10 values. We want to access the iteration number, like I mentioned, from this block here. So we're going to say detail 1, because this is our input number 1. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3. Then we are going to get a value called iteration, and then we're going to say 0. And that should give us here something. So in this case, again, since we are looping 10 times, if we are forcing this to be maybe once, we will now here have that first part. With that first part, I'm basically going to maybe just copy what I had over here. So copy this setup onto this side, and I'm going to then need to modify my spare input over here to this, like so. Maybe make some more room. So we make a system that looks like this. Our data, of course, will not directly work because our new value is called current part or current sentence. So here we're going to have to change the font store to current part. And now we have create quality add. So that is done. And if we would now output this loop and we say this back to 10, We will now have all the sentences. So if we had like a super long slogan, they will basically be now cut down into these parts that you see over here. We will also would like to know for each sentence which part or the iteration amount was. So we're going to create another wrangle, and we're going to basically store the iteration number that we had from that node. It's actually going to be the same thing that we made here, so we can might as well just copy it. And we're going to make a new attribute. I'm going to say here add iteration equals the detail iteration. So now we have an attribute here called iteration. So if I now would view it, should get the iteration number. So we have 0 and we have 1, since we only had like 2 sentences. And we can now easily space them apart by, again, using that attribute and defining the position. So add position.y. If we do minus iteration, so add iteration, multiplied maybe by 2 or something like that. Let's see how that works. It's something like this. So now we are building up these slogans. So maybe we can, if you want to put them close to each other, this is like the spacing value of that. So if you would choose a different font, let's say maybe we take something else here. Let's see, maybe just a normal one, like so. So if you now would play around with the seed value again. Now, last thing to wrap this up, I want to combine these elements a bit closer to each other. So this is our other part where we have the text, and this together will be our text maker for the board. Now, the part again that I've not talked about is to align these nicely with each other. So we want to have the store name at the top, big store name at the top, and then beneath that we want to have like the small slogan, or if they have like some other slogan or like say against a sale, we want to put that nicely to each other. What I want to create is a simple grid, and I will use that grid in later stages as well. I want to rotate this grid. I want to just rotate this grid like so in the x-axis 90 degrees. I want to change the rows and columns to 2. We don't need that geometry. And also the size itself, we're going to take 1.8, something like that, and maybe let's say 2.4, 2.5, something like this. So we have like something that looks roughly like an ad board shape, sort of. This will be like a tweakable value as well later on. Then we're going to use the match size node, which is very useful for this. So this will be our reference input, so our second input, and then our text will be the first input, like so. So you can see that we are now aligning the text with that object. So you can see that sort of like aligns, but importantly for us will be the scaling as well. So we can here set just scale to fit, and usually will disappear because this is a flat plane. A quick trick would be adding actually like a quick extrusion here and giving it like a little bit of an extrusion, and then you can see your text appear. So that's like a quick trick to make it fit. So again, making it into a 3D mesh will make it fit. You can also go here into like different options. Like I only want to scale this on the x-axis, which actually could make sense for us because the x-axis is the length of the text. But you can also just put an extrusion. We can also here force the text to be a bit higher up. So here we can manually force this to be like at 7, for example. Like it's always going to be a bit higher. So this is our main text, and then we're going to do the same thing. So here we're going to do the same for the slogans, and instead of course of doing the 7, we're going to do like -0.4 or something like that. Now we have that. So we can merge these two together. So we have now this, and we can also again play around with the size, of course, of elements. So we're going to transform. Let's say we want to scale this bit down. You can move it back up. It's like up to you to where you want to see those elements. So this will be then my output of the text. And maybe we can overall scale this to 0.9, because the reason is if you merge this back with our plane, because this plane will be used to make the actual geometry for the sign, we now are sort of like a bit more into that sort of like spacing or padding of the fonts. So scaling that a bit down. So we now have this board generated. So you can see it nicely fits everything into that space. So if I would make this board now a bit larger or smaller, it should roughly be scalable in that area. Of course, if you go to extreme, you might need to fix that as well. But if you don't go to extreme, it should be doable. That was it for this video. We made the full text system or setup for this tutorial. And next up, we're going to look into making some actual geometry for the boards itself.